Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Abby and I want to cast on a new sweater soon, which means I need to finish some whips. So that's what we're doing. Let me give you the rundown of what I'm working on and what I would like to finish. I have two projects that are quick wins. These are going to be really fast to finish. I just need the motivation to finish them. First, I have the Jaunty shawl by Andrew Mallory. I knit this in Fiber Space Cumulus, which is a Surrey alpaca, and I literally got to this point when I ran out of yarn. So when my yarn comes in, this will be less than an hour to finish. Another quick win, my Christmas socks that I did not finish by Christmas. This is using a skein by Tiny Human Knits in the colorway Season's Greetings. And this is how far I am. I have one more stripe in the toe to go, and then this will be an FO. So I think that this is what I should focus on first, since I can just knock these out. And then I have two sweater projects which are not as quick. First, I'm working on my Tessellated Vest. You have seen this a few times. I just finished the right front. And so now I need to pick up or put these stitches back on my needle and work this side. Then I will work the back, which is currently on waste yarn, and do all of the ribbing and the finishings. So we're getting somewhere with this. This has been a whip for several months, and I actually started spinning this back in February of 2025. So it feels like I've been working on this for a year. The yarn that I'm using is, as I mentioned, my hand spun. This is a braid from Nest Fiber in the colorway Glad Tidings. And this is what inspired this entire project. I had seen someone on Instagram knit this sweater with the full length sleeves with a hand spun skein out of this exact fiber. And I had this in my stash and I really wanted to recreate it with the same fiber. I'm also using Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair in the colorway Mustard. And I am using two skeins, so I'm holding two strands of the mohair together. I did some swatching and I found that I liked that much better, and it's going really well. The mohair sticks to itself, so it's really not an issue to use two strands. And then the main color is this Imperial Yarn Mackenzie. This is a fingering. It's in the colorway Moss. And because this is a fingering weight, I am adapting the pattern to be at a smaller gauge. I've gone up a needle size, and I'm also knitting a size larger than I would have to get the right dimensions. So that is this project. And my last active whip that I would really like to finish is my hand spun sweater. Here's how it's coming along. Actually, I'm just gonna put it on real quick. So as you can see, I am really close to being done with the body. I have maybe like an inch or two more to go before I start the ribbing. I can't remember what the body length is in the pattern, but I probably don't want it to be too much longer than this. Actually, I may knit like a few more inches. I don't really want it like riding up, and these are also very high-waisted pants, but I am making pretty good progress on this. It's just stockinette back and forth right now, so it's very mindless, and I just pick it up whenever I need some mindless knitting. So I really like how this is coming out. Here's the back. I think it is so pretty. This yarn is a combo spin that I spun over the summer during Tour de Fleece. I have plenty of yarn left. And an interesting thing that I'm excited to see how this works out is that one of these skeins, this one, has shorter color repeats, like I spun it that way, for the sleeves. So I'm curious to find out if the sleeves will mimic the striping of the body. The hope is that the sleeves also have some of these smaller stripes and it's not just like large chunks of color. So we'll see how that works out. This is the Port cardigan by Ozetta, by the way. It is a pretty basic stockinette crew neck cardigan. It has this little detail, this ribbing detail on the arm side, By the way, the arms are like not too small, but they are kind of on the verge of being like a little bit smaller than what I like for a cardigan. This is a pretty like close fitting cardigan though. I mean, there's a lot of ease in the body, but the neck fits pretty close and the armholes are pretty tight. So it's not like a big oversized sweater where the sleeves are gonna be huge. And then as far as the ease in the body, I think it's a really good amount. It's a little bit hard to tell because it's curling and there's gonna be a button band. So I don't know, we could maybe estimate about there is where it'll be. And like, you can see there is room here, but it's not oversized. So I think I am liking the sizing so far. I'm loving the yarn. It's very, very soft. I think this is gonna be a really nice cardigan. I'm excited to finish it. I also have some buttons. I have some button options. So we'll go over that once I get closer to knitting the button band. But for now, I'm just gonna keep working on the body until it's a good length. All right, now I gotta get to work. So let's go. So as I mentioned, I have one more stripe to go, and then I will start the toe with the contrast mini that this sock set came with. Okay, I just finished the sock. I just finished weaving in all the ends. My stopwatch is at 52:23, so that took me just under an hour. And the first whip is done. That feels good since these are for the knit along that I'm hosting. So had to make sure I got these done. Next up is my tessellated vest, and I've actually already gotten started on it. So I had finished one of the fronts and I have since finished the other front. So the entire front is complete up to this point, and I've just gotten started on the back. I'm working on the underarm shaping, and then I will start working on the yoke. So I have really been on a roll with this one. I'm very excited to finish this, and I anticipate I will wrap this one up pretty quickly. The worst part about this knitting experience is the yarn management. If you've knit this pattern or other color work where you have 3 or more yarns, you will understand this, but it just turns into chaos if you don't manage your yarn well. I have been alternating between keeping everything in order and knitting and just letting the yarn do what it wants to do, and then once it gets into a big mess, untangling everything and starting that process over. Currently, I am in a phase where I'm keeping the yarn managed very well, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I'm working longer rows than I was for the front, because once you get to this point where you're knitting the 2 fronts independently, you are knitting such short rows and you're changing the yarn so frequently that it just gets really annoying to have to like unwind your yarn as you go. Anyway, so I'm keeping everything where it should be and I'm having a decent time with that. I've also been keeping my mohair skeins in a bag, so that helps me keep these 2 skeins together and separate from my other skeins, especially as I pull off yarn. Like, it's the most annoying when like one skein goes flying when I'm trying to get more yarn. So it's just easier to keep them in this bag, keep everything contained. And then my other 2 skeins can stay untwisted as long as I'm keeping them in front of me on my desk. So this has very much been a desk project for me. I've occasionally taken it to the couch, but for the most part, I've just been sitting at my desk working on this so that I can have my skeins stay put where they need to be. This is one of those situations where I really wish I had one of those like yarn holders. There are several different kinds. I'm thinking of the one that is just like a stand, and then there's like a stake that goes through your cake and just spins as you unwind the yarn. Here's how much yarn I have left. Well, I have 2 more of the green skeins left, so I'm definitely good on that. And then this is what I have left of my hand spun. This looks like enough yarn to me. I think I'll have a decent amount left over even. So I think I'm good on yarn. I'm not gonna run out. Something that happened with this project is when I split for the underarms, I had too many stitches in the front and I didn't realize that. I had cast on too many stitches when I started this project, and I didn't realize that even through binding off the neckline. So I finished the entire front before I realized that the neckline wasn't centered, which made me realize that my stitch count was just totally off. It's fine that the body has those extra stitches, like there was probably fewer than 20 extra stitches, and this was going to be a little bit on the small side just based on the size that I chose originally. So in the end, it's all fine, but it did mean that I knit the entire front before I realized my mistake. Sorry, there's some noise going on in the background. So I kind of went through some suffering with this project that I did not need to go through. So that was pretty annoying, but I was able to fix it and get back to where I needed to be in, I think it took me about 3 days of focusing on this. Obviously not knitting the entire day, those are work days, but just working on this in the evening. So that's where I'm at with this project. I'm loving the colors. I am still mostly enjoying the knitting. I mean, I would like to be done at this point, but I'm not hating it. And I'm glad that I worked the front first, which is what the pattern has you do, because the front is just much more tedious than the back. So yeah, I'm just working on the armhole shaping, then I will just work straight until I get to the back neck shaping. I think there is a little bit of shaping, I could be wrong. If not the back neck shaping, it'll just be the shoulder shaping and connecting it at the shoulders. So I feel like it's really coming along. I did try it on the other day. It's a little bit hard to try on a bottom-up sweater, but I just held the shoulders like kind of where they should fall to check the length, and I think it's fine. It's a little bit short. This is a very cropped pattern, and I decided I didn't want to lengthen it. I might regret that decision, but in the moment I was like, I really don't want to knit on the body anymore. I just want to proceed to the next step. So I just knit it to pattern. I am short and I have a short torso, so I think this will be fine, especially with like my most high-waisted pants. But as far as leaving a little bit of room to just be comfortable in, this is not really the garment for that. Like, I think it's gonna hit me right at where I want it to stay. And so if I move around, it's going to ride up a little bit. I'm just gonna wear a shirt underneath. It's not that big of a deal. And at this point, I would just like to finish this project. But if I could go back, I probably would add like an inch of length, but it's fine. I'm gonna keep going because I think I'm gonna like this. I also think it's gonna grow a little bit. I haven't blocked it yet, but my swatch did grow just the tiniest bit. So I think transferring that amount of growth from my swatch to the full-size sweater, I think it is going to grow just a little bit. I can also kind of stretch it out as I block it. I can't remember if I mentioned this, but my hand spun yarn is actually superwash, and it's not that different from other fiber that I've spun. It doesn't really feel like superwash, honestly, but that might be contributing to why my swatch grew a little bit when I blocked it, and might also help this stitch pattern grow. So we'll see what happens, but I'm gonna keep working on the back and probably get that done before I see you next. I lied, you're gonna see me before that. It's the same day, and I just went to a creative reuse store near me that was taking donations for yarn, and I dropped off some yarn I wanted to donate, so that was great. And while I was there, of course, I browsed and I found this. This is, I think, some cotton. It might be a blend of some type, But this was some hand-dyed yarn. I have 3 skeins of it, and these are big skeins. So the reason I picked this up is I'm looking for yarn that I can use with my knitting machine. I want like fingering weight or lace weight or something on the finer side. So I was really excited to find this because this seems like it will be perfect to test out on my knitting machine, and I think I can at least knit a vest out of this, if not potentially a full-size sweater. I will weigh it to see like how much I actually have, but that was all a really good deal. And then I also found this cone that definitely feels like wool of some type. I don't exactly know what it is, but I thought it was really pretty. It's a heathered yarn, also a light fingering weight, and I don't know what I'll be able to actually get out of this. I mean, this is a pretty decent amount of yarn, but we'll see. I mostly just grabbed it so that I can experiment with my knitting machine, so that was a very exciting pickup. Hello, my knitting friends. I have knitting friend updates for you. I finished the back and I've attached the shoulders. The back did indeed have some neck shaping, just a little bit. So that is what the back looks like. Love how the color changing yarn worked out. And here's the front. So the shoulders are fully attached. And I got started on the sleeve. I meant to check in with you before I did that, but this morning I woke up a little bit early before work. And while I was drinking my morning coffee, I picked up the stitches for the first armhole and I knit the 1/2 inch of ribbing that you work before the tubular bind off. I stuck to the pattern on how many stitches to pick up, even though I did have those extra stitches in the body that I bound off. And I didn't find there to be any issue with that. In fact, I would say that the rate of pickup is fairly high. Like there are a lot of stitches to pick up. So I did that and I just followed the pattern for the size that I'm making. Everything is working out. This looks like an appropriate sized armhole for a vest to me, which is good because sometimes looking at an armhole before you pick up the stitches, you're like, what did I make? Like this is a body circumference. But once you pick up the stitches and you knit the ribbing and everything cinches in, it looks much more reasonable. And I remember having this exact same thought process on the first vest that I made, the only other vest that I've made. So it's just part of the process. So here is how it's looking. It's very cute. It is quite cropped. I haven't tried it on yet because I just finished the shoulders last night and I just got home from work. So this is all I've been able to get done since then. I think once I bind this first armhole off, I will try it on just on my own, just to see. Like I said, I think blocking is going to help stretch it out a little bit, but I probably won't try it on for you until it's fully complete, but I'm getting there. I'm getting close. I think I can get the ribbing done pretty quickly actually, especially because it is just very thin. There's not a lot of ribbing to knit. So I think I'm really, really close. I'm on the home stretch, which feels great. This is going to be my first garment finished object for 2026. And I will be wearing this as soon as it is off the blocking mats. Okay, it's done, and I wanted to show you pre-blocking. So this is it, fresh off the needles. I think it's pretty cute. If it doesn't end up stretching at all with blocking, I would still be happy with this, but I am hoping for just a little bit of length. Maybe if it was something closer to where my t-shirt ends, I would be a little bit happier with that. So this is it before blocking and after blocking. Obviously I'm not wearing this with the same outfit. I have played around with the styling a bit and realized I like this vest over a collared shirt because the neckline comes down a little bit lower. It really didn't grow much in length. I think it might be the exact same as before blocking. When I soaked it, it did stretch out, but as it dried, it just bounced back to its original length. But honestly, with a shirt like this, I think the length is totally fine and actually looks cuter than if it was like a couple inches longer, because I like that the button down shows under it. I think it makes the look more intentional if the button down is like showing underneath the vest rather than just like a little bit. So this is how I wore it to the office today. This is the day after I blocked it, so I immediately had to wear it. I really love it. I love the way the colors turned out. I love the stitch pattern. I think the fit is like perfect even with how cropped it is. Here is the back. I think it just looks really nice, and it ended up being like the perfect circumference. Those extra stitches in the front definitely help with the bust shaping. And it's funny because that's something that I have intentionally done with previous sweaters, is just like add some of the total circumference to the front and then take it out of the back. So the fact that I accidentally did this time, but it totally worked out as if I had intentionally done it, is kind of funny. So can't complain. I am really happy with the armholes as well. I think they fit perfectly over a shirt and they don't look too big, but I can't feel them. It's not like they're restrictive in any way. So I mentioned my neckline is a little bit lower than this pattern intends for it to be, and I wasn't sure if I liked that at first, but I do think it has grown on me. The reason it's lower is because of my row gauge. I changed the stitch and row gauge of this pattern, and I didn't really do a whole lot to modify any of the shaping that corresponds to the length. So there are sections of this pattern where it tells you to knit to a certain length. So you can measure your knitting and your row gauge doesn't really matter. But the neck shaping is one of those instances where it's written out row by row, and if your row gauge is off, you're gonna get something different than what the pattern is intending for you to. If I had a little bit more motivation by the end of this project, I probably would have modified the pattern to fit my row gauge better so the neck did come up a little bit taller. With the way it worked out, I like this a lot with a collared shirt. So I probably won't wear it with like a t-shirt or a long sleeve tee, which is how I've styled my other vest. But I'm kind of surprised how much I like a collared shirt under the crew neck, like the lower crew neck, versus my V-neck vest. So I really like how mine turned out, but I just wanted to address like why my neckline is lower. I changed the row gauge and I just kind of let the cards fall as they did, and I didn't do much to actually control what was happening. I have seen some other projects on Ravelry with lower necklines, and I wonder if this stitch pattern is kind of tricky to get, like both stitch and row gauge, and so maybe some people had some row gauge discrepancies and just followed the pattern and got what they got as well. And I don't know, like if there's nothing wrong with it, it doesn't look bad in my opinion, but it's definitely something to be aware of. If you want to get the same look that Andrew Mallory has, you will need to get row gauge. All right, that is a wrap on the Tessellated Vest, almost 1 year after I first started this project. It was worth it, I would say, but if you don't like mosaic knitting or if you don't like working with more than 2 colors, I would personally pass on this pattern. But if you can make it through all of that, I think it is a really gorgeous vest. I would never make the sleeved version though. That is a step too far for me. Now that I'm finally done with my tessellated vest, I am ready to dive back into my hand spun sweater. And spoiler alert, I did already start knitting on this. It's been a couple of days since I picked this back up. So I did end up adding some length to the body. The pattern calls for 10 inches from the underarm before you start the ribbing. And then there is about 1.25 inches of ribbing. So it is like 11.25 inches from the underarms to the hem. I decided to knit mine so that it will be 13 inches from the underarm. So I knit the body until it reached 11.75 inches, and then I just started the ribbing and I went down 2 needle sizes, which because I'm already knitting this at a smaller needle to hit gauge, I am knitting the main part of the sweater, the body, on a US 4. The pattern calls for a US 7, and it has you go down 2 needle sizes for the ribbing. So I'm knitting the ribbing on a US 2. And although you won't be able to get like the full picture since I'm just on the single needle at the moment, I do want to try it on so you can at least see like the length that I'm going for. So yeah, it's about like where this shirt is hitting me now. It's a pretty good length on me. It feels comfortable. It doesn't feel too long, but it's also not cropped. Had I stuck with the 10 inches before the ribbing, it would be kind of somewhere closer to here, like just above my pocket. And that's like a little bit too short for me these days. So I do like that little bit of extra length. I'm probably like half an inch into the ribbing, so it will end up being a little bit longer. But I think that is going to be a really good length on me. Even with adding the extra length to the body, I have so much yarn left over. So here's where I'm at on the skein that I'm currently working on. This is my second skein out of 4. So I'm about to run out of this one, and then I will cake my next skein up. But all that I'm going to knit from this skein is just the rest of the ribbing for the body and then the button band and the collar. So it's really not going to use up much more yarn, which is fine. Like I overspun for this project just to make sure that I had enough, and because I had the fiber in stash already, so I just decided to spin all 6 braids. And then here is the skein for the sleeves. So it's all working out nicely. I'm just gonna keep working on the rib, and then I think the pattern calls for an Italian bind off. It does. So that's what I'm gonna use. What I'm gonna do now is cake up my next skein for the body and finish this off, and then I will also start picking up a sleeve. I am going to a like craft night at a bar tonight, and so I want to get this project in a state where I can bring it and knit without having to think too hard. So I want to get the next sleeve picked up so that I'm ready to just start on that. I have not read the pattern yet for picking up the sleeve with the ribbing. I can't imagine this is going to be too difficult, but there might be like a specific way the pattern has you pick up the stitches just to make sure that this looks nice, the armhole looks nice. So I'm gonna read through that and then like focus on this before I head out, and that way I can just work on this mindlessly. So I think I'm gonna work on this pretty quickly because I'm so motivated to finish this. I am just really excited about this project and I really want to finish it. Okay, it's been a few days, and as I suspected, I have been working on this so much. It's the only whip that I'm working on, and I have made a ton of progress on this the past couple of days. I also have a decision to make about the length because I think I made it too long. As I was editing it and watching myself try to figure out the length, like where I wanted it to hit on my body, I realized that that might actually be a little bit too long. I went ahead and knit it and bound off the body, and I'll show you where it's at. I really can't decide. So I think what I'm gonna do is block it at this stage so I know for sure what the length is and then can make an informed decision. So I will try this on and we can assess together if this is too long. I really can't decide. So after I bound off the body, I picked up for the first sleeve and really sailed through the sleeve. It is a pretty simple sleeve where you just do decreases at an even rate. The only like unique thing about the sleeve is that there are some short rows right at the start to help shape the sleeve. So if you notice, this first like stripe of color here is thicker at the top, and you don't even really see it there at the bottom. And so those are the extra rows that you add to the sleeve cap to kind of shape it, like shape the shoulder area, which I really liked that. I didn't know that that was included in the pattern. It is very simple to do, so it really doesn't add much in terms of effort, but I think it does really help shape the sleeve since this is a drop shoulder and those can sometimes be pretty shapeless. Okay, so let me try this on. This is actually the first time I've tried the sleeve on. So here's the sleeve. Here's the little bit of shaping just to help it contour to your arm a little bit better. I'm just about done with the decreases. I think I have one more decrease to go, and then I'll just continue for a couple of inches. And then here's where I'm at with the length. So I would like to pick up the button band to know for sure what the length is going to do, but I also want to block it because obviously the ribbing is like pulling in a weird way. And so until that relaxes, it's hard to know exactly if this will be too long. I mean, from the back, it really doesn't seem too long, but then sometimes I look at it and I'm like, I don't know. That feels a little long to me still. So as I mentioned, I will finish the sleeve and then I will block this. And then I can check the length of both the body and the sleeve to see if there's any change with the blocking, or if once the ribbing relaxes, I'm okay with the length. I think right now I'm just regretting a little bit adding that extra length. I don't know if that was necessary, but I've just been wearing all of my old sweaters so much this winter and they're so cropped that I think I'm like overcorrecting. With the sleeve, my gauge is a little bit off with this pattern, so let's chat about that real quick. So my stitch gauge is very close to being spot on. I am just ever so slightly tighter, but my row gauge is a little bit more off, so I am off by almost a half row per inch, which means when I'm doing stuff like shaping a sleeve, that is going to need to be accounted for. I'm actually not changing the pattern because when I did the math to figure out what my decrease rate needed to be, I found that if I added a row in between decreases, my sleeve would end up being too long. But if I kept to the pattern and I just knit how many rows it says to knit in between decreases, my sleeve is only a little bit shorter, like less than an inch shorter than what the pattern calls for. So I just decided to stay with the pattern and then I'll add that extra length to the cuff, or like to, the bottom of the sleeve before I start the cuff. I generally like a little bit of a tighter sleeve, so I would prefer to decrease a little bit more rapidly rather than delaying those decreases towards the end of the sleeve. So that's kind of how I made that decision. It was all very close, but ultimately, you end up seeing those decisions in the finished garment. So I just wanted to talk through that. Okay, it's blocked now, and here is the length. It really didn't grow any, but it did help the ribbing relax as well as the sleeve. What do we think of the length? I also knit the other sleeve. I just finished it last night, and so this sleeve is unblocked. You can kind of tell a difference. This one looks a little bit neater, kind of sits nicer as well. So I'm so close to finishing this, and I just need to decide if I'm gonna pick up for the button band or if I need to shorten it. Here's another look. So it kind of hits me like, here's my waistband. These jeans are mid-rise, which is typically what I wear these days. So it's definitely coming past the waistline, which is what I wanted. I have a lot of older sweaters that hit me like kind of closer to here, and that's just a little too cropped for me now. I definitely like to have a little bit extra length, but I've sat on this for a few days, going back and forth on if I should shorten it or not, and for a while there I was almost decided on shortening it, basically back to what the pattern calls for. But now I am like 90% in the camp of keeping it at this length. I did ask my Discord what they thought, and the initial responses have been that everybody likes the length, and I'm pretty sure I'm just gonna keep it at this length. I think I would prefer a little extra length over cropping it too much, and so I ended up adding just about 2 inches of length to what the pattern calls for. The only issue now is that I need to think about button placement. I have several different button options that we're going to talk about, but I only bought the amount of buttons that the pattern calls for each set. So maybe if I had planned ahead to add length, I would have bought an extra button or two, but I didn't. And I don't really feel like buying extra buttons right now. So I have two options. One is that I could space the buttons out a little bit further apart. And two is that I could leave off a button at the bottom, which I'll pull up the pattern photo. The way Ozetta wears her cardigan is she has it fully buttoned except for that last button. And I do like that look. I'm not sure if I'll wear my cardigan fully buttoned or unbuttoned most of the time, but I like the look of that last button not being there. Obviously, she has a button there. She just doesn't button it. So she has the option to button it. But I think, that could be something that I could do to make it work. So those are my options. If I end up spacing out the buttons, I will need to do a little bit of math to figure that out. It's not going to be like that difficult, but that's kind of what's keeping me from picking up the button band, is just that I'm indecisive and I can't figure out what I want to do. I would hate to make it this far and then flop when it comes to the button band. So I'm going to give it some more thought before I do pick up the stitches. But man, I've been wearing this just around the house when I got home from work today, and I really, really like it. It is very soft. I basically can't feel that I'm wearing it. It's not like overly warm. It's not too heavy. It just feels really nice on. Oh, I also wanted to acknowledge that the sleeve worked out. So I did the same amount of decreases that the pattern called for, and then I knit an extra like 13 rounds before I started the ribbing to account for my row gauge. And I like the sleeve length quite a bit. It hits me just, right at the wrist, which is a good length for me. If I went back, I would maybe knit an extra 2 rounds just to kind of account for the sleeve like scrunching up a little bit as I move. So the next thing for me will be picking up the stitches for the button band, and I'll let you know what I decide on all of the things. Okay, it's later in the day. I filmed that clip earlier, and I have decided to pick up the button band. I'm leaving the length as is, and I'm just going to space the buttons out a little bit more. And I'll just account for that extra space for each button. So for each button, I will add about a 1/4 inch, like a little bit more than a 1/4 inch in between buttons. And I think that'll be a small enough space. It's like, I don't think that's gonna come across weird. But I'm not a designer, so I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. We're gonna find out. Okay, the knitting is done. It still needs to be blocked and it still needs buttons, but I have finished both sides of the button bands. I finished the neckline and I wove in all the ends. So I need to wait until I block it to fully determine if this was the right pickup ratio for the button band. Right now it is cinching in, but this ribbing is at a pretty tight gauge, so the ribbing for the body cinched in quite a bit before I blocked. So we'll just have to see if that relaxes enough after I block it. I did follow the pattern for the neckband fully. It has you picking up a certain amount of stitches per section all the way around, so it's pretty easy to follow. But for both sides of the button bands, I did a little bit of math to figure out the best ratio, and I don't know if it was actually the best ratio yet, so that will be determined after I block it, but I will just walk you through what I did. I ended up adding less than 2 inches to the body, and I could have just used the same pickup ratio in the pattern and picked up the stitches for the button band and then adjusted where the buttonholes fall on the band. That would not have been a bad way to do it, but my gauge is a little bit off from the pattern. My row gauge is a little bit tighter in relation to my stitch gauge than what it is in the pattern. So I have about 1/4 of a row more rows per inch Then I have stitches per inch. Kind of a weird way to think about it, but I have a row gauge of 7.4 and a stitch gauge of 5.2 per 1 inch. The pattern calls for a row gauge of 7 and a stitch gauge of 5. So my gauge is a little bit tighter, but my row gauge is a little bit more of a square shape than the typical like rectangle shape. If you ever like chart out stitches in rows, you have to adjust the shape. You can't just use like regular graph paper as squares because typically our stitches are not squares. So my row gauge is ever so slightly tighter, and you know, a quarter of a row over an inch like doesn't take up that much space at all. It's almost a negligible amount. But when you spread it across the 20 plus inches that is my sweater from the shoulder to the hem, you do get a little bit of variance. So I tried to account for that, and I don't know that it was worth it, especially when you consider that the pattern has you pick up a multiple of 10 stitches plus a number. And so I had to adjust up or down by 10 stitches. And the difference between just following the pattern and working out what I ended up doing was 15 stitches, which does account for the extra almost 2 inches that I added. So basically what I was trying to do here was find a pickup ratio that gave me the same amount of stitches that I would be getting if I was following the pattern, even though I ended up adding the length and I have a different row gauge. So the pattern has you pick up 80% of the stitches for the button band. So that's how to think about it. That's 4 out of every 5 stitches. And then I took the total rows that I knew I had from the shoulder to the hem, and I multiplied that by different ratios until I got roughly the right stitch count that I was looking for. And so that ended up being 75% or 3 out of every 4 rows. So I ended up picking up 3 out of every 4 rows. For the neckline, like I said, I didn't change that because it's a fairly small area. So I just didn't feel like doing any math. I think it would have maybe amounted to like a few stitches different. So here is what it looks like right now. Like I said, the ribbing is really pulling in, and I'm hoping that is because the ribbing needs to relax, not because I should have picked up more stitches. But typically on a button band, I would say I typically will pick up like closer to 70% of my rows. So that would be like 5 out of every 7 rows I would pick up. So the risk is that if I follow the pattern, I might have picked up too many stitches and I might get some like rippling. Looking at it now, I don't think I would have run into an issue, but I guess sometimes you just need a little problem to solve, you know, to focus on while there are so many bigger problems happening. So that is what I ended up doing, and we'll see once I block it if it was worth that effort. And then once I block it, I will also sew on my buttons. And then I think I addressed this already, but if I decided to cut that, I did end up just spreading out my buttonholes a little bit. So I just took my total stitches minus the stitches that I left at the bottom of the button band, and I divided that by 5 because one of the buttons is in the neckband, so there's only 5 along the button band, and it ended up being like I think 2 additional stitches between the buttonholes, so it's like not even something you're really going to see or like something you would notice. So that ended up working out totally fine. And then as far as my buttons, I'm just looking up the ones that I ordered. These are the matte shell buttons from La Mercerie, and I ordered a bunch of colors because I couldn't decide what I wanted, and I wanted to see them in person and hold them up to my sweater. Okay, so these are the options. I will put a photo of them all. I have 5 different colors. I have 6 buttons of each color, and honestly, I don't know if I'm closer to a decision. I did post about this in my Discord, and somebody said to do one of each color, which I think was a really cute idea. But I think because this sweater is so colorful and stripy, I think it needs something to ground it a little bit. And so I don't think I'm gonna do one of each color, but I liked the idea. I'm kind of leaning towards the little periwinkle blue. I don't think that I was originally going to lean that direction. I really liked the green, but I think the green is a little too bright and like spring coated. Like I know the sweater is very like pastel and spring vibes, but I kind of don't love that about it, if I'm being totally honest. So I don't know. I think I might be leaning towards one of these options, either the light blue or the teal. The brown would also be a pretty neutral one to go with. The good thing is that I can always change out which buttons I put on. So if I end up hating it for some reason, I can just take them off and put on new ones. This is the final clip of the port cardigan because I finished it. I did not need to redo the button band. Everything blocked out beautifully. I put the buttons on. I made a decision about that finally. It honestly took me some time to wrap this up because I was just ruminating on each part, but it is done. And here it is. Ta-da! I love it. I love the fit. I love the yarn. It's honestly, it's kind of wacky. It is like a little bit more, I think, out there than I was expecting it to be. It is also so comfy. Like this thing is so soft and I feel like it fits really well, except for one thing, which we'll go over. But I'm gonna show it to you buttoned up, but I just wanted to show you as well it unbuttoned. I think it's really cute both ways. When I first decided I wanted to make this, I thought I would only wear it fully buttoned, but seeing it over just like a white tee like this kind of has me wanting to wear it like this more often. But let me button it so that you can see it in its full glory. By the way, my voice is a little rough. I'm getting over a cold. Oh, I really like it buttoned. I think it's really cute buttoned up as well. So, okay, here is my finished handspun port. I started spinning for it in July of 25 of last year, during Tour de Fleece, and I cast this on in October 13th, so like mid-October, and then I finished it like mid-February, early to mid-February, I would say. So not too bad. Okay, let's go over the buttons. I decided to go with the light blue. I think it's really cute. I can always change it later, but I sewed the buttons on with like a dark blue teal thread. I've never done like a contrast thread before, and I thought it was really cute. And I also sewed them a little bit differently. I didn't do the X. I just sewed them straight across. Oh, and I did do the shank method. So there's a really good Roxanne Richardson video on how to do this exactly. I use it every time I put buttons on, but you just create a like thread shank so that there's space between the button and the other side of the button band, and that helps the button band lie flat. Now, a couple issues with the button band. One is that between these two buttons, it does pull ever so slightly. So if I'm just wearing it and moving around a little bit, you'll notice a slight gap here. I don't know if that's because of my button placement or because of my bust, possibly. I do feel like this has a good amount of ease. It's not too oversized, but it definitely has some room. So I'm not exactly sure why that's happening. I could just wear it like this. The other thing that's going on is the top button honestly looks terrible buttoned. It is in the collar, which is a fairly thin collar. There's not a ton of ribbing here. And this is what happens when I button it. This poofs out. So I am going to try steaming this out, like just putting direct steam right here to see if it'll help relax the fabric a little bit. But I think It just has to do with where the button and the buttonhole is placed in the collar. And I noticed, because I went back and looked, that Ozetta doesn't have any product photos with this top button buttoned up. I looked through projects and a lot of people do just tend to wear it like this, and so it's not really going to be an issue. But there were some people I noticed who had this issue, and there were a couple of people who it didn't really seem like they had much of an issue. Their button bands weren't like perfectly straight, but they didn't necessarily have that same gapping. So I'm not 100% on why it is happening. Like I said, I don't knit a ton of cardigans, so I'm definitely not like a button band expert. I don't know too much about what exactly would cause that, but my guess is just the placement, and then possibly the fact that the collar is fairly thin, and so there's not a lot of room for this top button. Regardless, the neckline is a little too tight for my liking, so even if this didn't happen, I probably wouldn't wear it all the way buttoned up. So it's like not that big of a deal for me, but it is something I'm noting for the future. I probably wouldn't choose to knit this cardigan again if I wanted just a plain stockinette cardigan. But besides that, I do like the fit quite a bit. I think it's cute with the last button unbuttoned. I'm pretty happy with the length. Maybe I went like a centimeter too long for my liking, but it's hard to be mad at that. And I think I'm happier having not gone back to fix it than I would be if I forced myself to reknit the ribbing. Here is a back view, as well as the shoulder detail, which is really nice. I think the colors turned out really well. And the sleeve detail, which is very subtle, but is a nice little addition. I think those are pretty much all of my thoughts on this sweater. I really enjoyed spinning for it. I enjoyed the knitting process for the most of it. The stockinette did get a little bit boring, as it tends to, but I knew what I was getting into when I decided to knit this pattern, and I'm really happy that I knit it. This was my first Ozetta pattern, and I'm about to cast on a second of her patterns, and I'm still figuring out what I think of her pattern writing and designs. I understand her popularity. Like, she makes a lot of really nice looking garments. I am not like the biggest fan of her pattern writing style. It reminds me of Petite Knit in how like simplistic it is. There are a lot of sections where she just repeats instructions or like things that you should know as you're working through it. And I can see how that would be nice for beginners who maybe aren't as familiar with how to do stuff like pick up a specific rate of stitches, or just kind of some basic stuff like that. She really holds your hand through it. The biggest thing that I dislike though, and this is like very specific to the device that you read your patterns on, I don't like the layout of her patterns. It's just like words on a page. Like, there's a little bit of a hierarchy to the sections, but it almost looks to me as a document that's in the early stages of development, like before you finalize the layout after you've written the content. And I just don't like patterns like that. I just find the words like hard to follow. Like, I find it hard to read on the page because I am 99% of the time reading patterns on my phone. And if you have a 2-column layout, you can zoom in to one of the columns and read the text better. But with text that goes across an entire page, like, there's only so far that I can zoom in without being able to see the entire line like across the page. So I just find those types of patterns to be more difficult than they need to be. And like I said, that is kind of a personal thing, because if you're reading it on a laptop or a computer or a tablet even, like, you're probably not going to run into that issue as much. That being said, if you follow the pattern, you will get the finished object. You know what I mean? Like, she tells you everything that you need to do. It's just a little too hand-holdy for me. I found myself like skipping reading sections and just going to, okay, what does my final stitch count need to be? Or what are the total number of shaping rows that I need to complete for this section? Because she like lays it out in multiple ways, and I just didn't need all of that. So those are my nitpicks. I will be knitting another Ozetta pattern, so we'll see if she has a similar style carried through to her other patterns. And overall, I am very happy with my port cardigan. The yarn is a little wild, but that's what you get from a hand-spun sweater. And now I'm already planning my next hand-spun sweater because I just can't help it. Oh hi, it's me again, back to tell the story of how it took me 2 months to get the yarn for my final project. That's it. That's the story. It took 2 months. This finally arrived in the mail just the other day, and I have been waiting to upload this video for weeks longer than I should have. I thought about just skipping finishing this whip, and I was like, whatever, I'll just finish it in the next video. But then a bunch of life stuff happened and I ended up not getting this video out. And here we are, finally having received the yarn, and now I can finish it. It's not the fault of Wool & Co. They didn't have it in stock when I ordered it, so they special ordered it for me. And Fiber Spates just took a really long time to dye it. In fact, I tried to get this from my local yarn store, which is where I originally bought the yarn, and they didn't have it. They told me that this was a really difficult color to stock. But anyway, it's finally here, and now I can finish my Jaunty shawl. I really can't believe that I got this far, and it's 100% my fault. There's a whole part of the pattern that tells you to save 10% of your yarn when you start knitting the second half, just to account for any gauge issues or any gauge changes. And I just didn't do that. I got to a point that I thought it was halfway. I weighed my yarn and it was like exactly half of the yarn. And I thought, it'll be close enough. So then not only did I have to order an entire new skein just to finish this, but I also had to wait 2 months because this is apparently a difficult colorway. Some people suggested I just finish it in a different color. And like, yeah, you're probably right. But I am stubborn, and I really wanted this thing to just be one color. So I am going to finish this and see if it was worth the wait. I am just looking for my needles. I think they're down here. Is this the right size? No. Not in there. Aha, okay, I found some. So luckily, I think the color is as close as it can be. I mean, it looks the same to me. I was a little bit worried that it was going to be a slightly different color. Honestly, I would have just used it. All right, I'm gonna put the stitches back on the needles. So I worked on this shawl a lot during the weeks in between Christmas and New Year's when I had a lot of time to knit. I spent like essentially an entire day working on this, and that is how I got so far. And I was really trying to finish it before the new year so that I could include it in my 2025 finished objects. And that's when I ran out of yarn. I went to my local yarn store on December 31st and was hoping to finish it that day, but they didn't have it. So now, 2 months later, I am finally finishing this. One thing that I tried to do was decrease more rapidly here at the end, just to see if I could finish it with the yarn that I had, even though it obviously wouldn't be to pattern, but it just looked really bad. And this is one of those scarves where the way I'm gonna wear it, you will see the tips, like these are gonna be pretty prominent. And so it really wasn't something that I could just hide. So I'm glad I waited. I hope it's gonna be worth the wait, but at this point in the year, we've had such a mild winter that I actually don't know if I'm gonna be able to wear it this season, especially because it's alpaca, so it's very warm. So maybe if we have a cold front come in, I could wear it, but the entire West Coast has just been so warm this winter, and I'm trying not to think too hard about that in this very moment. I'm about to get to a decrease row, so I will leave you here and finish this and check back in when I'm done, finally. It's the next day and it's finally done. I bound it off last night. I think it was this side. You graft the I-cord stitches together using Kitchener stitch. And so it looks really neat and matches the other end. And this is finally an FO. It's very toasty, and I think I'll wear it like this most of the time. There's like a couple different ways to kind of wear it all wrapped up, but I do like the single wrap with the knot. I think that's really cute. It looks nice under a jacket, which I have this one, and I actually don't know if these like really go together, but I think it's cute. Let me know what you think. I'm gonna take it off though because this is very warm. Just the jacket. I'll leave the scarf on while I'm talking about it. I really liked this pattern. It is half fisherman's rib, and it's a lot of half fisherman's rib, but it's just one of those nice patterns to have on the needles when you want something that is mindless, but a little bit more than stockinette. And I do think that flat half fisherman's is especially nice because you work a row where you're knitting in the stitch below, and then the next row is just a knit row, so it's very easy. I also found that I was able to read the increases and the decreases very easily, so I did not have to keep track of rows, which I think really contributed to my enjoyment in knitting this. If I had to keep track of an increase every 4 rows, I don't think that I would enjoy it, but the fact that I could just read my knitting and figure out what I needed to do as I went made this a really nice pattern to knit. And I am planning on making a second one. I would like to spin for my second one. Andrea Mallory is doing a Jaunty spin along, Jaunty along I think is what it's called, where you spin for the Jaunty. So I will probably be participating in that. I used just over 3 skeins of Fiber Space Cumulus to knit this. Obviously, I could have done it with just 3 skeins. Like, I did not need to order the 4th skein. That was my bad. But the nice thing about this pattern is that it is gaugeless, so you can really knit it with any yarn. You can knit it any size. You just knit until you're halfway through your yarn, so you really don't have to be particular about the yardage. And I think there are 4 sizes in the pattern that correspond to the yardages if you want to like plan out what size you want to make. Mine ended up being, I would say, like a medium size. Like, it is a really nice size for me. Here is the depth of the triangle. And because this is a like lace weight alpaca, it's very light, super lightweight. And so it really scrunches up. I mean, like, that's how thin it can go. So I wasn't too concerned about the size for that reason, but I do think this ended up being a really good size. For my next one, I might go for something maybe just a tad bigger. I don't know. I do really like this size. And I think it works really well to just wrap it around. Could even just wear it like this with the ends out. So I'm quite happy with the size that mine ended up being. I do want to chat about the experience of knitting the half fisherman's rib in this fluffy lace weight alpaca single strand. For the majority of it, I didn't have an issue. I didn't find it to be that difficult. Even though you do lose some stitch definition, I was still able to read my knitting to do all the increases and decreases, like I said. And there were moments when I had to go back and fix mistakes, whether that was ripping back or tinking back, or dropping my stitches down and fixing it that way, and I was able to do that. That being said, towards the end, I was kind of over the fluff. I'm glad I knit it in this yarn. Like, the finished object is really nice. It's so soft. I love how lightweight it is, while also being incredibly warm. But the actual knitting experience probably wouldn't be something I would choose again. But I do really like Fiber Space Cumulus. I think this is like such a nice yarn to hold as a single strand. So I can definitely see myself knitting with it again on its own, but I'm not sure that I would knit a texture like this again. But here's a close-up of what the stitch definition looks like. Actually, I think that's the back. Yeah, here's the right side. So you can definitely see the rib. I think it looks really nice. You can see the increases, but it's obviously got a soft, fluffy texture to it. So glad to finally call this one a finished object. Thank you for watching. I know this took me a while to get this video out. I will have some videos coming out a little bit sooner next time, so stay tuned, and I'll see you then. Bye.